It's time for Waking Up with Wesley. Today's forecast and weather-wide discussion with WLOX First Alert Weather Senior Meteorologist Wesley Williams.
Waking Up with Wesley is sponsored by Exclusive Auto Brokers. For the best deals on wheels, visit Exclusive Auto Brokers on Beatline Road in Long Beach.
Hello there, South Mississippi, and thank you for waking up with Wesley. I'm Senior Meteorologist Wesley Williams. So, of course, we know it's hot, it's summer, and we're going to talk about it today, that potential for extreme heat. If you have our First Alert weather app, you've already received this alert for an extreme heat warning along the coast and a heat advisory for areas that are a bit more to the north of Interstate 10. In this video, I'll do a quick science explanation about why this heat can actually be dangerous, and then we'll talk about which spot could see some of the worst heat today, break it down for you hour by hour. So those alerts that we are talking about, let's take you right to the map. This is a look at the heat advisory in that orangish color, which includes all of Pearl River, Stone, and George counties. It also includes northern portions of Hancock, Harrison, and Jackson counties. And then right along the coast, for areas near and south of I-10, we have that warning, which is actually a bit worse than the advisory. So that's southern Jackson, southern Harrison, southern Hancock counties underneath that warning. So that's something to keep in mind for your Monday plans, the potential for dangerous heat in our 6 southernmost counties. Now, as we zoom the map out, we can take a look and see who has alerts and who doesn't. And right now it looks like it's primarily over the middle and eastern portion of the country. These alerts go down into Florida. They go all the way up into portions of New Hampshire. They go west to areas near Kansas and South Dakota. And they go north up into Wisconsin and Michigan, west to Texas, and of course, right here in South Mississippi. In fact, the entire state of Mississippi is under these alerts. And that's definitely a widespread type of deal when you have the heat spreading out that wide. But why are these alerts coming out? A lot of you are probably scratching your head wondering, it's summer, it's supposed to be hot. What makes it alert worthy? And we'll take a look at what's happening right now to answer that question. So first of all, before we get to the current conditions, let me take a look at the high temperature forecast today. And remember, there's normal summer heat, the kind that you're wondering why does anyone care, but then there's above normal summer heat, and that's one of the reasons why you might begin to care when the temperatures are higher than they usually are, because that's not something you might be used to. And that's what we have in South Mississippi today. Above normal temperatures will reach the upper 90s. You're also noticing, I'm going to use this comparison a lot in this video. Look over to the west near Arizona. They have a high temperature of 112 degrees in Phoenix, Arizona. Now that's just on the thermometer. You would think the heat index will be worse, but you might be surprised. And that's what I want to do right now, is talk about these current conditions. So where do we see overall the warmest temperatures on this map? Primarily in this zone here. This is a current condition, current temperature as of 8:30 in the morning on Monday. We have most of those middle and upper 80s there. But again, look off west to the Arizona part of the map, and you see they're at 86. So say it a different way, right now Arizona is hotter than Gulfport by 4 degrees. But the real big difference, because 4 degrees on the thermometer, so what, right? The real big difference is this number, the dew point number, the amount of moisture in the air, because that makes all the difference. If you've ever traveled to Arizona or anywhere in the West, these areas here, they always say it's a dry heat. Okay, it could be hot, but it's not muggy and hot. It's dry. And that number there, a dew point of only 43 in Arizona, that is completely crisp and dry air. Nothing muggy about it whatsoever. So even though it's currently 86 there on the thermometer, the dew point of 43 almost makes that 86 feel pretty comfortable, especially compared to us in South Mississippi. Remember, the Gulfport temperature 82, but when you have the dew point way in the mid 70s, that's way up here, right? It's at the top of the charts, mid and upper 70s. You don't really see dew points go much higher than the mid to upper 70s anywhere in North America very often. And we get it all the time here in South Mississippi when you have those dew points that high. The air is extremely juicy. You walk outside, if you're like me, you're wearing glasses, they instantly get fogged up. You're also noticing that it feels like air you can wear, right? That's that moisture in the air. Here you go. Here's the payoff. This number, the feels like temperature, also known as the heat index. Look at it. The number's right there. The proof is in the pudding. 89 for the heat index in Gulfport. Oh, but I thought the temperature was cooler there. It feels hotter compared to the heat index of 83 in Arizona, even though their temperature is higher. So again, just to put it a different way, let me type it on the screen and really spell it out for you here. We have 86 degrees for a temp in Arizona. So they have 86 degrees for the temperature, right? But they have a dew point in the 40s. So the combination of that dry air with that type of heat leads to a heat index of only 83, which is pretty comfortable. But then you take a look at Gulfport. Remember, we mentioned that the temperature there is only about 82. .82-degree temperature in Gulfport, but the dew point is in the 70s. So that makes it feel much muggier. And there you have it. You have all the information on the screen of why the mugginess makes it feel hotter. Now, if you want to get really into the weeds of the science, we have even more information for you, because this heat index number, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It came from years and years of scientific research about this information I'm about to share with you. So we know our body temperature. The usual temperature our bodies tend to stay at is about 98.6 degrees. That's why when people are running a fever, you put a thermometer in their mouth or under their arm or wherever, and you find that temperature higher than that, and then that tells you someone's running a fever. But the normal temperature, 98.6 Fahrenheit. So when our body temperature rises above that, the body has a natural way that it tries to cool itself off. That process is known as sweat. So when you are sweating, that is your body trying to cool itself off. The sweat is released from your skin, and that sweat, that water in that sweat, is trying to evaporate. This is a process known as evaporative cooling, and that helps to take your body temperature down. It is basically releasing that heat from your body in the form of sweat. When that sweat is evaporating, that takes the body heat away and cools that temperature back down for you. Now, on muggy days, when the air is so juicy that my glasses are fogging up when I'm walking outside, that sweat's not going to evaporate as easily. The air is so saturated, it's so full of moisture, that evaporative cooling process takes much longer, or it might not even work at all. So you're sweating, but that sweat's not evaporating. It's just sitting on you. That body heat that your body's trying to get rid of is just trapped right on you. This is why it feels hotter on a muggy day than it does on a dry day. This is why it feels hotter in South Mississippi than it does in Arizona. Even with the same temperature, you have different amounts of mugginess, and that makes us feel hotter than them. Even though their high temperature today is going to be way in the triple digits, we might not even hit the triple digits, but we will probably feel hotter than them. You have this whole chart where you can easily calculate this. You can do a web search for heat index chart and pull this up from the National Weather Service. And notice that we can tell you today, we know our dew point is going to be in the mid 70s, somewhere around 74, 76, and we are forecasting a high temperature of about 97. So that takes us over here. So that puts us in this zone right about here, where we're going to see heat index in at least 108, but possibly up to around 113, depending on how high the exact temperature gets and how high the exact dew point gets. So that's how you can calculate that heat index. Sometimes you use dew point, sometimes you use relative humidity. They're basically about generally the same thing. They're just different ways of interpreting that information. But that's how you get that information, and how the National Weather Service knows when it gets over 108, that's when they pull that trigger and issue a heat advisory, or they may also issue a heat warning if it's supposed to get to over 112, like what it could happen today, where on the coast it could be a bit muggier. And so you're looking at the temperatures, and places north of I-10 might not make it all the way to 100, but they're going to come close. They're probably going to go to about 98, 99 on the thermometer today. That hottest part of the day, probably around 4 p.m. Meanwhile, on the coast, the temperature going to 97, and that could be around 3 in the evening. But remember, this is not the heat index number, and we are forecasting heat index of 112, 113 on the coast because it's muggier there. Even though inland, it might not get all the way to 112, 113 because it's not quite, it might not be quite as muggy there. And as far as records go, we actually might not be that far from a record high temperature today. We are forecasting 97, and where they keep the weather records in Gulfport, Biloxi, the long-term weather records, the ones that date back over a century, the record highest July 28th temperature is 99, set back in 1982. So we could come close to setting a new daily record high temperature for parts of the Gulfport, Biloxi area, depending on how high the forecast goes. If we get the forecast exactly right, record will stay safe. But if the temperature gets a bit higher than the forecast calls for, then yeah, maybe we could set that new record. So this last part of the video, we'll just go through with a little bit more detail to give you that hour-by-hour information about your South Mississippi location's temperature. By the way, it's a beautiful morning out there if you haven't stepped outside and looked at the bright blue sky and all of that sunshine. But here's those temperature numbers, not the heat index numbers, just a temperature forecast. And we're seeing 80s on the map as we go through this morning, but eventually climbing into the 90s in just the next hour or two. And before you know it, we'll see sizzling mid-90s by noon or 1 p.m. Some places will creep into the upper 90s. Look at Saucier, look at Lucedale, only a degree away from 100. So some places could be very close to 100 on the thermometer by Monday afternoon. And then the sun is setting, and that's what allows those temperatures to finally fall below 90 degrees as we head into Monday night. The reason for the heat today is, well, of course it's summer, but the above normal heat because we've got this dome of high pressure sitting directly on top of us. And so that's air that, high pressure causes sinking air, not rising air, but sinking air. And as air sinks, it does heat, in this case, with this high pressure situation happening. So that is going to allow for those temperatures to climb above normal, maybe near record territory. And then when you add that mugginess to the mix, all that moisture in the air, that's what makes it feel hot. The National Weather Service is indicating it's going to possibly feel dangerously hot with that heat index climbing over 108 degrees. So here's a look at the heat index numbers, also known as feels like temperatures. And by the time we get to 9 or 10 o'clock this morning, that's when those alerts kick in. That advisory, that warning, that begins at 10 o'clock this morning. And we're already seeing triple-digit heat index by that point in time. We can see the heat index climbing upwards of 108 for most of the area by the time we get to noon or 1 p.m. So if you have lunch plans, it's going to be pretty sizzling hot out there, feeling like it's blazing hot, really. And you're noticing that as we go to the 4 o'clock time frame, it's still not going to see much improvement. So that 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. time frame will be the hottest feeling part of the day. And you're looking at where the highest numbers are right here, right along the coast, near and south of I-10. The reason for that, because you are close to the Gulf, or close to the Sound and the Gulf, and the air there is a bit more moist because it's right next to a big body of water. So that added moisture in the air can make the heat index a bit hotter. Once you go away from that, it's still dangerously hot for places like Lucedale, Wiggins, Poplarville, but maybe not quite to the degree as these folks by the water, because the mugginess may be a little less high for areas that are inland, so you might not have to worry about it being to the degree. But again, splitting hairs. Splitting hairs aside, it is going to be dangerously hot everywhere. And then by 7 p.m., we begin to see these numbers come down out of that danger zone. And probably going to do it again tomorrow, folks. So get ready for at least another day in a row, going to Tuesday, with the heat index climbing upwards of 108. We're probably going to see another round of hot weather alerts for South Mississippi. Now, maybe by Wednesday, we could begin to see some relief. You're noticing those numbers not climbing above 108, so that could be the first day that we might not have one of those hot weather alerts. Once we get those numbers to stay below 108, it's no longer deemed dangerous by the National Weather Service. But on a day like today, if there's anyone spending multiple hours outside today, not drinking any water at all, not taking any breaks in the shade or the air conditioning, you have a higher risk for succumbing to heat exhaustion or heat stroke. So that's why it's important to take this stuff seriously and to use those common sense heat safety precautions. Just telling yourself, well, it's summer, it's supposed to be hot, that does not save you from the danger. You have to actually act and drink extra water today. You have to actually act and find a break in the shade, in the air conditioning. If you don't take those actions, you are putting yourself at a greater risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. By the way, this stuff impacts people every year. Every year, people right here in South Mississippi, right here in the Magnolia State, and all across the country, every year someone falls victim to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. And it's sad to say it, but heat is actually the #1 cause of weather-related fatalities. You can take any of the fatalities from a tornado and add them on top of any fatalities from a hurricane, and those numbers will pale in comparison to the number of heat fatalities on average each year. So it's important to, just take care of yourselves, folks, and don't take it for granted. The heat can sneak up on you because you take it for granted. Now, like I said, there is a possible pattern change when that high pressure moves away from us. That will open the door for some better rain chances. Today, on Monday, only a stray storm, if any rain at all. By the time we get to Tuesday, and especially Wednesday, we're seeing better chances for scattered showers and storms. Maybe by the end of Wednesday, some of us could pick up around an inch of rain, especially near Pearl River County, where the latest information shows a decent amount of rain in that area. Whenever it's really hot, that adds fuel to thunderstorms. So even on a day like today with only a 20% chance for rain, if we see even one thunderstorm, even a half of a thunderstorm, that one is gonna, be pretty stout because there's so much heat out there. It's gobbling up all this heat energy, and it can easily become intense, producing frequent lightning, gusty winds, and even some intense downpours. I don't think we'll see much of a risk of street flooding today, but as we get into Tuesday and beyond, we technically do carry a daily risk of isolated downpours that could lead to localized street flooding, primarily in urbanized areas. So keep that in mind, that if you're having travel plans Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, if we're seeing those scattered showers and storms in the area, might put out some downpours that lead to localized street flooding. Well, hopefully you stay safe in all the heat. That'll pretty much do it for this edition of Waking Up with Wesley. I've been Senior Meteorologist Wesley Williams. Take care, and we'll see you again next time.
Waking Up with Wesley has been sponsored by Exclusive Auto Brokers. For the best deals on wheels, visit Exclusive Auto Brokers on Beatline Road in Long Beach.